Hello, everyone. How's the sound? Sound good? Okay, the title is Sovereignty in the Constitution versus the Threats That We Face. I wanted to start with, did you know that eagles catch snakes? You did? You all did. That's good, because I had forgotten that. And I thought it was pretty significant, Eagle Council and so on. So eagles are in the Bible, and they're also the symbol of this group, our group. And they not only fly high and have a broad panorama, but they also protect us from venomous creatures. And maybe weasels, too, and a couple swamp creatures while we're at it. So here's a rhetorical question, only really partially, and that is, it's actually a deep question. You probably all wondered it. I can, by the way, make the PowerPoint available to the team, too, and anyone here is welcome to have it. But why don't we recognize the threats that we face? Have you ever thought about that? What it is the mystery about us, our incapacity, our inability to acknowledge and recognize and identify the threats that we face. Has anybody ever really thought down to the bottom level of it? Well, I think it's more fundamental than that. And I think it goes back to something that started in 1973. The fact that we normalize the killing of our own children makes it psychologically and physiologically impossible for us to respond to a threat that's abstract and undefined. If we can kill our own children, which is anything but abstract, how are we going to be able to respond to a threat that is undefined and remains so partially on purpose, i.e., it's no connection to Islam, or it's a social movement that talks about diversity and inclusion and fairness and equality, but none of those terms are ever actually defined except by those who control the narrative. So I think if you thought about it a bit, you'd see that that is part of the reason we've injected our mind with the shot of Novocaine or cauterized our brain. If we value life, we would protect our borders, and we wouldn't be arguing about sanctuary cities, would we? Because we would recognize that we don't want people coming into our community that may very well kill our members of our own family. Would you agree with that premise? Yes. Meanwhile, just how far will this battle go? Have you thought about that question as well? I'm often asked, how far is this thing going to go, Mr. Haney? Well, I'm going to give you a couple approaches to it. One is going to be biblical. And this is Isaiah 28, 5 and 6. And there's a great promise embedded within this. And that the Lord himself is going to be a crown of glory and a diadem, which is a symbol of sovereignty, by the way, and a spirit of judgment and strength to those who turn to battle at the gate. What's the name of this event? Gateway, Eagle Council. We're at an allegorical and an actual physical gateway with a symbol to it, not far from here. Well, we're also at a gate in terms of the times that we live in, and there are those, a remnant perhaps, but nonetheless, there are those who will find themselves at the gate. It's very possible the battle will go clear to the gate. But there are going to be a remnant, and it's promised that they would receive strength and turn the battle at the gate. Just as individuals and so as a country, the Lord has invested a lot in America, and he does intervene in the affairs of people, doesn't he? It's called an election, for example. And then here is President Lincoln, who faced something like us today, and I love this quotation. The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate for the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, but we must rise with the occasion. And as our case is new, is some of our case new? Yes. So we must think anew, we must act anew, we must disenthrall ourselves. What are we enthralled by? And then we shall save our country, the last best hope on earth. Those are the words of a statesman. We have far too many politicians, a.k.a. swamp creatures, and not nearly enough statesmen. Would you agree with that? We have a few statesmen here we've been hearing from today. And patriots. That's a strong combination, patriots and statesmen together. Go back. One. So I often have discussions as I travel around the country, which I've been doing for the last 2.5 years since I retired as a founding member from the Department of Homeland Security in 31st of July, 2015. I've been on the road pretty much constantly, and I can tell you that there's an underground river, I call it the Artesian River, that's flowing across the country from north, south, east, and west. And just like they did in the lead up to the presidential election, the geniuses in the mainstream media are missing it this time too. They're not measuring the current that's down a little bit lower than their instruments reach. And this river is flowing right under us right now, friends, across the country, northeast, west, and south. But the question is, again, more fundamentally, what are we fighting against? Each person I tend, and this might be by observation, the alliance, that's what I call all of us, the alliance. Our greatest weakness is that we don't have a unified, coherent strategy. Everybody is fighting or opposing a particular issue, and we don't actually have a unified, coherent strategy. Not that these issues are not important, but we don't actually understand what we're fighting for, which we'll get to in a second, part of the title. But here, what we're fighting against, remarkably, with the foresight of our founding fathers, they saw exactly what might happen. Because we're people and they knew our strengths and our weaknesses. And what we are actually fighting against is an effort, as highlighted in red, to alter or abolish the current form of government and institute a new form of government that's more suitable to the world view of those who oppose our sovereignty, as defined by the Constitution. That's why you never hear them either discuss the Constitution at all or marginalize it as something that is no longer valid for the time we live in. So that is the reason, that's what we're fighting against, both in the global Islamic movement and that what I call the apples, the Antifa progressive leftist socialists apples, because they're red. Both of them have a definition of sovereignty, but neither of those definitions are based on the Constitution. One of them is based on a very fundamental objective thing called Sharia, which is actually a book, and the other is a worldview defined by diversity, inclusion, the right to come into rooms and shout and scream if you don't agree with an opinion. That's how their sovereignty is defined. That person's or groups that was just here, their definition of sovereignty is not based on the Constitution. Otherwise, they would honor the process and participate in it, but they don't have any respect for that definition of sovereignty because they say it will lead to people dying, right? But here's what we're fighting for, friends, and that is sovereignty, the right to choose a form of government that we would live under without being coerced or forced to live under it by deception as well. So that's what we're fighting for, and I believe that's one of the variables in the equation that we've been missing, the unified strategy. What are we fighting for, friends? Sovereignty. And if you think about it and you listen to the arguments, look at the Kavanaugh. Was that based on a definition of sovereignty, would you say? Or is that something different? It was not based on a respect for the Constitution, was it? Their definition of sovereignty does not include a judge like Kavanaugh. And the reason why they are so hysterical is because they're like addicts who has had the thing that they're addicted to taken away from them and poured down the toilet from their perspective. Because what have they been addicted to? A definition of government based on an abuse of the judiciary. In other words, pass legislation or implement legislation not through the checks and balances form of government, but by abuse of the judiciary, by fiat. And they're so addicted to it, the thought of having somebody like Kavanaugh come in who will ultimately involve, is part of a group that every single case that comes forward that has any bearing on Constitution, if it violates the Constitution, eventually will arrive at the Supreme Court, and they know it. And they're hysterical because of it, because they're addicts. Our poor, pitiful countrymen are delusional and hysterical. And every day that they do this, I'm all for the First Amendment. Let them keep on talking. Because just like apples on a tree, every day that goes by, those apples get a little bit riper. And President Trump, in my opinion, is a genius to allow that fruit to ripen so that everybody in the country can see just exactly what kind of people these really are. And he's allowing, and I believe his legacy will be, that he's actually taking us back more to a checks and balances form of government rather than intruding himself into the process by pen and phone. He's allowing the process to unfold, even though it's like watching sausage be made sometimes. Nonetheless, he's letting, and it also shows you how far we've gone from the founding principles of our country. So, some of the threats that we face include the swamp. We've heard a lot about the swamp. There's some swamp creatures swimming around on top of the White House. And then, of course, we rely on the swamp to give a report on the swamp. And like the creature from the Black Lagoon, you know, what are they going to find? The same thing that they always find when they investigate themselves. Just like my former boss said, we did everything that we could to stop the Boston Marathon bombing without telling you that they had actually deleted the information out of the system related to the Boston Marathon bombing before the bombing ever happened. Have any of you heard me talk about some of this before? I won't be able to go into a lot of it, but I'm a founding member of the Department of Homeland Security. I worked on the Muslim Brotherhood for many years, and another large group called Tablighi Jamaat, which is part of a global Muslim organization out of the Asian subcontinent that has a finger on the same hand, Tablighi Jamaat, Lashkar-e-Taiba, and another one you've all heard of, Taliban. The people in Afghanistan are all part of the same fingers on the same hand, a large branch of Islam coming out of the Indian subcontinent, another that speak Pashtun and Urdu, another large branch of Islam called Ikhwan al-Muslimun, the Muslim Brotherhood, that speak Arabic. They have different linguistic and cultural background, but they're both Salafi, fundamental, pro-Sharia, pro-Jihad, global level organizations. Those are the two groups that I worked on, and not because I knew it, but those are the two groups that got me in so much trouble I couldn't possibly exaggerate. Can you imagine having the same people that are going after President Trump now, and I mean that in an absolutely literal sense, the same people, Brennan, Mueller, Comey, etc., DOJ, FBI, that are going after President Trump right now, coming after people like me, behind the walls of the agencies with no media oversight whatsoever. How could a person possibly survive that? That's a whole story in itself. So I know these guys. I've seen them up close and personal. So you see, what they're doing now is nothing new to people like me, because they sharpened their knives on guys like me years before they ever decided they had to go after Trump. They're using the same techniques that they did then and, quote unquote, got away with it, so they thought. And as I said, they're addicts. And they're so addicted to what they are addicted to that they don't care what people think anymore, because they're just totally focused in their addiction. Like Gollum in The Lord of the Rings, it turns him into a hideous creature. And this is what's happening right now. President Trump is gradually taking us back. Right now, you may or may not recognize it, but we're about where we were in the year 2006. Again, I was a founding member. We started it in 2002. It was officially inaugurated in March of 3. But by about the middle of 2006, we were starting to go sideways on the ice. And by 8, we went right off the road. And then we've been sitting over there on the side of the ditch. You know, it's a well-built car. The MAGA car is a very well-built car. And all of a sudden, in our rearview mirror, we're sitting there waiting, stuck on the side of the ditch. We can't get out. Here comes some headlights, and it's a tow truck. And he attaches the chain to the fender and pulls that car back up on the road. We give it a try. It starts up. It's a pretty well-made car. Of course, then what's the question now? Where are we going? So as you pull away, you look in your rearview mirror and you saw on the side of the tow truck, Trump Towing Company. And I'm talking about law enforcement primarily, because it's the last arena between social, political, and law enforcement that will be reformed, because it was the first one to get corrupted. If you're going to fundamentally alter or abolish the current form of government, the first guys you got to go after are the law enforcement people and get them out of the way like traffic directors, and then just run them over. Don't even wait for them. Just run them over. And they were authorized to do it. So it was the first one to get corrupted, and it'll be the last one to be completely reformed, because law enforcement works through chain of command. No law enforcement officer is going to take the initiative to investigate a case if he's told by his superiors not to do it. So it'll have to come through the administration, right down through federal and then state. And there's a lot of law enforcement officers who took the oath who are waiting for that day to come, because they're more than willing to do it. But they can't take the risk. Right now, law enforcement is trapped in a twilight zone between the previous administration and the current one. And the current one has not been in power long enough to implement all the changes that are necessary in order to reform law enforcement and bring us back to where we were. Right now we're around 06, to where we were 2 or 3 weeks after 9/11. And that's where President Trump will take us when the MAGA car goes over the November finish line on its own power. We don't have to push it over. We don't have to tow it over. It actually goes with enough gas to make it over the November finish line. And then you're going to see Trump version 2. Remember I talked about the apples ripening on the tree? Then the apples are going to be ripe. And the American people are going to be ready to harvest that fruit, aren't they? So here's the 4 qualities of swamp creatures. Did you know I was an entomologist before I was the law enforcement? I'm a founding member of the Nerd Society. Yeah, we patented the clipboard, the white lab coat, the pen holder, and the big glasses. You know, we own those patents, see? And I was an entomologist. I traveled all over the world. I especially focused on the Middle East, and that's how come I know so much about Islam and Quran and Arabic and all that stuff, because I studied it for 15 years before 9/11 ever happened. And I seen these guys up close and personal. None of it was ever theoretical for me. When 9/11 happened, I knew just like that what was going on. I signed up through Max Cleland. I said, sign me up. I have a background. I know what's going on here. Sign me up. And I came in. And I went into the intelligence. I became an intelligence officer. I'm now a former Intelligence Officers Association. I think that's the right acronym. That's vetted by the CIA. Their headquarters are in Virginia, in Langley. So if I'm when I say I'm an intel officer, I'm an intel officer vetted by, the big boys. And so some of the things I learned as being a combination scientist and an intel officer is how to classify things. So here's the qualities of a swamp creature. They're mutant hybrids. They're hybridized between ours, Republicans, Democrats, and independents. And when they get into the fishbowl in Washington, they mutate into something that we don't recognize because no one elected them. The second one is that they're amphibians. They're camouflaged in red, white, and blue. They can walk right up out of the swamp and sit right down next to you, and you don't even know that it's a swamp creature. And the third one is that they're armed with very sharp, toxic stingers. And they leave painful scars, friends. And there's a particular place that they love to sting you. Can anyone maybe guess where that might be? Right there. And they leave a scar. You really know when you're stung by a swamp creature. It hurts for a long time. Because it's not jihadis from Yemen. It's your own familiar friends. The people that you are working and talking to every day. And the last one is the most strange quality about. They're anonymous, nearly all the swamp creatures. Who makes all these decisions? Who redacts all these forms? Who signs these letters? Who refuses to allow you to come in for an interview? Who blocks people off of Facebook and Twitter? They're anonymous, aren't they? You never actually know it. But there's an odd thing about them. Most of them have no faces. But a small group of them have 2 faces. The ones that you see in public and the ones that you never want to see, and those are the faces that you see behind the walls of the agency. When there are no restrainers, and then their full concentrated malevolence comes out. And friends, like I said, you do not want to have to see that. I did, though. I was investigated 9 times. President Trump's being investigated essentially once. Imagine times 9 over more than a 10-year period and surviving it. It's kind of unimaginable to me, too. But that's why I'm standing here before you today, because if I had violated subsection A-3.2 whatever, I would have been out. I would have been dead meat. That would have been it for me, and I wouldn't be standing in front of you because I've already been tainted. They would have said that Mr. Haney's unreliable. He broke provision, this, and this, and he was a discredited federal law enforcement officer, and he got fired, and he went to jail, or whatever it was. But none of those things actually, they could never find probable cause to indict me, even though they tried over and over to indict me and put me in jail. The very same people that are going after Trump now. Now, I mean that in an absolutely, explicitly real way, not allegorically, actually. If you look in the index of my book, virtually all the people that are going after Trump now are in the book. They were in the government when I was in it, and they were doing the stuff that they're doing now with no restraint whatsoever. By the way, who's our official time person? How we doing? 10, 15 minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, one of the other threats we face, I already alluded to, the global Islamic movement. Again, why is it a threat? Is it a threat because terrorism? It's a threat because they have a different definition of sovereignty. Not based on the Constitution, friends, based on Sharia, which, by the way, is a completely objective criteria. It's a law, just like our book. You can literally hold them in your hand, lay them on a table, open them up, and compare side by side. It's not abstract, it's not theoretical, it's actual law. That's their definition of sovereignty. That's why it's a danger. Terrorism is a tactic to implement Sharia law. We're not facing a global war on terror. We're facing a global assault on our sovereignty, our right to choose the form of government that we would live under without having it forced on us or by deception, which is the way the left operates. That makes sense? So here's a symbol of the global Islamic movement. Now, if you were on my intel team and we had a half an hour to do an analysis of whether or not that symbol poses any conceivable threat to our national security, that's what we call a first level analysis. And what would you say, just in a nutshell, that symbol represents? Is there anything benign about it? Is there an olive branch with the sword? Is there any exclusion zone? Wait till America comes around. Do you see like a no-go zone there? We're immune to the effect of it. And how about all that writing? You think if our boss comes and asks us what does that writing mean, that we should be able to tell him? Or should we just say, well, we don't understand Arabic. We don't really know what it says. Besides, it doesn't really matter because Islam is a religion of peace, right? Now, would you think you'd be in the intel biz very long if you had a boss that really had high-level expectation? No. You'd be reassigned. Right? Okay. So are you curious? What do those letters mean, by the way? Okay, good. Well, the white from right to left is Al-Ikhwan, Al-Ikhwan, Al-Muslimun, the Brethren of Islam, the Muslim Brotherhood. The yellow is Wayayuda. So what is that supposed to mean, you think? You wonder. It means prepare. So then what's the next question after that? Prepare for what? Prepare to terrify your enemies and slaughter them in battle. That's Quran, Al-Quran 860, Al-Anfal, the spoils of war, the most violent verse in the entire Quran. If the Muslim Brotherhood is an Islamic revival movement, do you think they knew what they were doing when they choose that particular word from Al-Quran 860, Al-Anfal, the spoils of war, to symbolize the nature of their movement? To prepare. Prepare for what? Jihad as a tactic, but it's not just the tactic, it's the goal. Implementation of Sharia law.
Gotta cut it off here, sorry.
Really?
Yeah, I'm sorry, but the next session is about to start out of the Grand
Can I have like 2 minutes more minutes?
Well,
I'll fly through real fast.
All right, okay, sure.
Okay. And here's the other threat. I really will. The other threat we face, one hand, definition of Sharia, sovereignty. The other one is the Antifa. Oops, I should have put A instead of the, but anyway. The Antifa Progressive Leftist Socialist Movement, the apples, because they're red. So, and that's my acronym for them, because they call themselves all those things. Antifa is anti-fascist. The guys that just came in, they fit in one of those categories anyways. So here you have another force of gravity trying to alter or abolish our current form of government and replace it with one that's more suitable to their worldview. Global Islamic, green, apples, red. Both have the same goal, to alter or abolish. One of the things I want to encourage everyone to do, not that you're not doing it, is go back and whatever premise you state, whatever platform you have, whatever position you take politically, that you be able to literally cite chapter and verse from where you derive it in the Constitution. If you can't do that, remedy it. Make sure that you can. Because otherwise you're spinning on ice. You're in the subjective arena and you can't actually define what your position is. You've got to go back to the Constitution. That's an observation of traveling around the country that, as I say, it's not a criticism, it's an observation that our Antifa friends don't know what our coherent strategy is, and they're not capable, they're not fluent enough in the Constitution to state their premise. A politician that doesn't know this Constitution is like a Christian that doesn't know the Bible. Neither one are very effective. And then here we see, this is just a cartoon. They keep sticking the fork in the wall, don't they? And then that's Latin, rex lex, or lex rex. That means is the law king or is king law? Which is our country based on? The law is king. But these people say the king is law. They are the king. So what do they say? Don't let them in, disobey, so on and so on. That's Antifa right there. Their definition of sovereignty is not based on the Constitution. No borders, no nations, no deportations. Well, if they believe in sanctuary cities, then let me ask a question. If you're an illegal alien, hightailing it down the interstate to get to a sanctuary city, how do you know when you've arrived at one? When you can breathe, you know, you're safe now. You're inside a sanctuary city. How do you know? City limits. It's a border. They actually believe very passionately in borders, but they're like Humpty Dumpty. Borders mean exactly what they want them to mean, not what the Constitution says. And there's the psychosis. And then here's the thing. The whole thing with Kavanaugh was about abortion. Everything's centered on that. That's the sun of their solar system. They want to continue normalizing the killing of children. You see how bad it is? The most senior elected officials in our country are completely addicted to the ideology of abortion, above all other things in multiples. I think we're almost done. What can we do? Well, we got to stop whining. And then we just go through some of the main constitutions. The primary responsibility of the federal government is to have a uniform law of naturalization. Are we following that right now? No. And to prevent insurrections and invasions. How about MS-13? Article 4 is, did you know that the federal government's responsibility is to prevent outbreaks of domestic violence in the states?
And to give us a Republican form of government, not a democracy.
Yes, that's right. And why is Sharia law illegal on the face of it? It violates the supremacy clause of the Constitution. It's not a First Amendment issue, it's a supremacy clause issue. We don't have a corpus of law. It's never gone to the point of Supreme Court yet. It'll have to unless we remedy it before then. And then this one, this is why sanctuary cities are illegal, because they're giving rights and privileges to the detriment of the rights and privileges of citizens. See, there you go. And I think we're close to be done. So what to do? It's time. What did Popeye say when Bluto was picking on olive oil? I stands all I can stand, and I can't stand some more. So this is what I want you to do, to go to Walmart and buy a case of spinach, each one of you, because it's time to open a can. Isn't it? And I think that's it. Yeah. Thank you for the little bit extra time.